Kansuki Dynasty. We have Brillian here, along with Amara on the controller and some of our usual suspects on their way in. We are, in various ways, continuing our recent topics, maybe talking about a little bit of new stuff.
But above all else today, we are working on understanding and dealing with the emotions that fighting games trigger in people who don't have a lot of experience with them. One very correct recent comment on Twitter: these games are more of a reality check than a power fantasy. And no matter how you look at it, they tend to be that way for a long time. If you approach a fighting game from the perspective of seeking gratification, therefore, you have to define what that gratification is going to come in the form of. The game will not necessarily just provide it for you. There are certain things that feel satisfying to do in the game, such as Shoryuka. But the game is not about simply doing those things over and over, as usually those things that feel rewarding because they're relatively hard to do. Unlike other video games where generally you do something the first time, it's cool for a couple times, about 10 times in you're kind of bored unless it was actually difficult to achieve it. Fighting games go back and forth on this quite a lot. Just as you can find a new game situation and execute the same thing you've been executing the whole time in that situation, but because it's harder, or because it took more setup, or it took more awareness overall, even though if it's not specifically harder to physically do, you end up feeling accomplished as a result. Fighting games are basically this, but almost an infinite level of it. Maybe the top players eventually become jaded or bored or have experienced it enough times. But that takes upwards of 5 years, and we're talking about people that play thousands and thousands of matches. Without going too much into the specifics of why certain things are rewarding because it's hard, and the form of design of game that can sometimes mean that the difficulty is a little bit much in specific ways, leading to it not being fun, we're going to focus on the emotions you get at the very beginning, when you don't know how to have fun in a game that causes you to fail so much. One of the main things that we face in games like this is the disconnection between the concept of what you try to do and what actually happens. Fighting games are way faster than most games. Execution is therefore a big deal. And, even more importantly, whether or not your opponent manages to execute something before you can is a huge deal. Their plan may simply exceed your plan, and there comes a point where, even with perfect execution of both plans, the better plan wins, even though you had a long time to think about them both, relatively speaking, up until that moment. You can't generally just do things faster in this game. They have a certain amount of time it takes for them to happen. And this is true in most games. But only a lot of competitive games are the situation where it actually matters because of the speed your opponent has as well. As you can see from the bottom of the screen today, we are once again having character select on, even though we are having the Mish-Mash style lounge. Even though we don't expect to see a lot of character switching within the team, depending on the strength of players that show up, you may see a switch to Karine or Ryu rather than Ken and Sakura.
Round one. Fight!
Fighting games also have the capacity to make you feel relatively lost about any given thing that is happening. They are a relatively constrained type of game. This is easy for those who have long played 2D games, particularly 2D platformers, but for those who have come up knowing how to do things mainly in 3D games where they have a lot of freedom of movement, and the game respects that freedom of movement by rewarding you if you have managed to dodge to the side or recognize a pattern, 2D fighters in particular tend to constrain you quite a lot to things closer to a platformer, in the sense that you need to understand what is happening in timing rather than in space. Space is extremely important, but you have to get the timing down first, or you just end up doing things that, while correct for the space, happen at entirely the wrong time, leading to bad results. It's very easy to get yourself into the mindset that if you hit the button faster or mash it more, that things should work out for you. And this is actually such an ingrained part of the human psyche that no matter how good you think you are, when you play most games for the first time, you have to go through this phase. Very high-level players consciously restrict themselves from mashing and so on, but they do this with the entire expectation that they're going to lose because they don't know the right thing to do, which means they'll never really be able to stop their opponent from doing what they want. And since you do eventually have to hit some buttons and hope that it checks your opponent's attempts, there's a lot of stress in there. However, once you do get used to the idea that you should just block until you feel like you understand what's happening on the screen, or if you feel like you never understand what's happening on the screen, ask someone. If you're got no one to ask, get a basic primer on the game's frame data, and that is the best way to look at it. Or use the training mode and make the training mode character do the thing, and then try to beat it with various options you've got, so that you're not doing that in a match and feeling uncomfortable about it. The second problem is always that when we do find ourselves physically limited by what the game requires of us, or unable to execute something because of the speed requirement and not knowing how to do it yet, we're more likely to end up pressing more buttons trying to get things done faster. This happens even to players in gold and platinum ranks. Just frustrated at a situation and having the instinctive human response to want to get out of that situation by doing something more quickly in order to resolve it. But if your opponent is actually attacking with an intent, with a strength toward their own plan, this is extremely unlikely to have any success.
Let's do this.
Getting yourself to relax enough is not only an extremely important part of this, it is a part that messes with your emotions because you recognize, if I slow down, I'm probably going to lose because I don't know how to stop this. However, there are quite a few games, even Street Fighter V included, where being able to just block for really long periods of time when you are not sure what to do is a valid strategy because it will give you enough time to figure out what to do. It's best, generally, to watch until you have a plan as to what to press, and just keep on trying to do that thing. Even if you just lose by that, it's better than just going, I'm going to just mash stuff in the hopes that I get out of this situation.
Round one.
You can also sometimes spend that time thinking about how your opponent is getting into the point where they're forcing you to block for a really long time. Mentally changing your perspective from, oh, I have to defend from this, and then try to get out, to instead, oh, they got close to me. That was the mistake. That was the fail. So there's nothing I can do now, I just take the damage. It allows you to get your mind to trying to look for how that happened, rather than ending up too heavily focused on what happens once they manage. This also helps you understand matchups and characters better. One of the things we have often mentioned about Ed is Ed generally doesn't like to play footsies, especially at the lower levels. He has a lot of high mobility moves, but most Ed players don't actually play footsies in any form. They wiggle a bit and then they do a special, and then they wiggle some more and they do a different special, or they jump. So in general, you don't need to expect Ed to do much in terms of footsies. And even more importantly, you can often affect the other person's mindset in the same way. If they're stressed, they'll fall back to what's often done by their character, and a lot of the time, that means you only need to understand the matchup after you've stressed your opponent out enough.
Ken wins.
This is even more concisely shown when someone tries to pick a new character that they've never picked before, but have seen played. They have a decent idea perhaps of how to stop, or how to shift someone to do specific things, or they have a good idea of how to do enough damage to actually make something dangerous. But do they understand how to change your mindset relative to the character, or stress you out enough to actually be a threat? That means that for a long time, this is more so a game of testing each other's stress reactions. And testing stress reactions for a long time can often make you feel as if you're fighting yourself instead of the opponent. And that's honestly what's going on most of the time.
Round two.
Amara will defend, and so far, our Ed player will jump. The question is, Can she stress them out enough to make them want to jump and then punish it and be on the lookout for the jump? And can they stress her out enough by faking the intention to play neutral, or maybe landing a couple things, to then make her not pay attention to the jump? And that's about all it is. The combos really just choose the speed of the match. Will this work or not? And as you grow in confidence, you learn to separate those feelings from each other. For example, if it's more frustrating to you to take damage in footsies or in neutral, then you're likely to be the type of player that gets jumped on a lot. And if it's more frustrating for you to get jumped on, you're likely to be the type of player that takes damage in footsies. Simply because your focus moves toward what you think your opponent wants to do, but also what you want to definitely make sure doesn't happen to you. This is a part of a cognitive bias as well. Knowing that you could anti-air is in fact one of the things most likely to get people hit. You know that an anti-air is conceptually simple to execute. You've practiced it possibly against bots, possibly against other people that you know well. And therefore the feeling is, I need to watch out for footsies because footsies is complicated. Footsies has parts that I might mess up. The anti-air, I'm just too slow, or I'm just not focused enough. And while that's true, technically that happens because you're worried about the footsies. A player who is just constantly expecting the jump at all times gets beaten in footsies but can't generally be jumped on.
Round 2.
Depending on your character, this may be harder or easier in any given timing. For example, as you can see here, Ken does not have an easy way to beat Ed's cross-up jump, and the Shinryuken doesn't do the job. Ryu would be better at discouraging this particular opponent from doing this thing, simply because he would have more ways to stop the cross-up. Similarly, the question as to whether or not Amara should play Ken or Ryu comes down to things like that. If she prefers to play footsies and deal with taking damage in footsies, and this is the thing she cares about more, it helps to have at least the option, in some situations, for a one-button response to a cross-up jump.
Let's do this.
This is a large part of how people end up choosing their characters in certain situations, and why sometimes nerfs and buffs to a character can drastically affect how someone feels emotionally about playing them. If you end up with your character's skill that applied to the thing you like being nerfed, then obviously you lose out somewhat on those things, and you might have to shift your focus.
Round 1.
You should generally try to choose a character according to the archetype that you like to play, but also the one that you can manage to do your defensive things on. We have a similar issue with Kanzuki Dynasty, i.e. Rune Siren, and Sakura. Her Sakura offense is notably bad. We've already discussed this before. But the reason her offense with Sakura is bad is because of the way she focuses on playing offense. In fact, it is partially because Sakura has a need to be able to anti-air in particular situations, whereas Karine can get out of the way entirely very fast. If you just don't want to deal with certain jumps on Karine, you step out of the way, and the opponent eventually gives up. Since Sakura does not actually have this option, the opponent gets to continually move back to a position where they could set up the jump, but this is not a good position for Sakura offensively. In other words, it becomes a feeling of, I want to walk forward and play footsies and hit you, but you're going to jump at me if I do that. And on Karine there's an instant response to this, in fact there are 4. On Sakura, there are not so many instant responses because you have to measure the distance between you and the opponent quite heavily. If they happen to get over your head, big problems tend to happen. Now, in past Street Fighter games, and to some extent in this one, this was easier to deal with because Sakura's light uppercut is just basically, it doesn't look as powerful as it is. It will take people out of the air 90% of the time with very little threat to you, and most of the time in the perfect spacing that the opponent thinks they're about to get a cross-up, what ends up happening is that Sakura gets hit airborne and there's no combo. But until one knows and thinks about this from the perspective of what you were trying to do with Karine, what you try to do on Cammy, what you want to do as a normal thing, it's easy to feel as if you should respond to the opponent getting to their jump position by attacking or doing tatsu or something, which is the opposite of what you really want. They don't want to play footsies. We just saw this player play Ed, and we know that they're not that interested in playing footsies. I haven't seen a single medium kick, and I don't really see that many fireballs. There's a axe kick finally. But you can see, generally, they want to jump. And the way to think about this is understanding that that's their primary goal, at least until you teach them otherwise, means that what you should do is focus on the spacing between the two of you, not as a footsie thing, but as a jump thing. Rather than tracking which button should I hit in footsies when my opponent is this far away, you should track which anti-air am I going to need if they jump.
And that is not
Without this, you will end up forcing yourself into offense.
Final round. Fight.
That was very fortunate in that she went for offense, but again did not actually end up advantaged enough that that was technically real. The Ryu player could have expected that based on this. If they weren't necessarily so jumpy before, they might have been paying enough attention to recognize this is somewhat desperation or just a stress reaction coming out, something my opponent possibly did not want to do. They're autopiloting at this point, and I know how to defeat that autopilot. But there's the button to stop all and jump-ins, period. If you don't want to hit that heavy punch, then Sakura's crouch heavy punch is a tremendously good anti-air button. The distance behind her head that it hits is quite frankly unrealistic. Even for this game. And therefore you can just use this button to solve basically all your problems.
Round 2. Fight.
There are a few jumps wherever you can set up the situation, and this is not the obvious solution, but then most of the time Sakura can just forward dash in those situations, similar to our Kata 22 training. When you've gotten this far, you can also help yourself by letting some of the fear of losing go away. Fighting games are a lot more about a certain number of interactions going your way or not than anything to do with that specific aspect of it. Meaning that you can, if you found yourself losing in 2 to 3 interactions, but you know you could probably still do this, you'll be fine.
Final round. Fight.
But it's also absolutely true that many people, emotionally and somewhat correctly, don't find this either interesting or fun. It's literally just repeat until success in a lot of cases, until you get good enough to have the first order strategy of any given opponent just stop working entirely. And this is the purpose of bots. The purpose of bots is that you should take them seriously enough that you figure out some way to simulate the stress of an actual match and force yourself to do the correct thing many, many times. This is why it is not enough to be able to beat a bot by doing like half an hour of training and manage to get to 10 points once in that matchup. Once is definitely not going to be good enough when it comes to an actual match. You need to be able to beat most of our bots on medium without dropping around. 100% of the time you will reach 10 points before you actually lose. Because that is the only level of performance that will generally prepare you for an opponent who is willing to just keep jumping.
Yeah. I sort of have this problem in that I did a bunch of air-to-air training recently with Karine, just the air-to-air, with Sakura, a bit of air throw along similar lines. And I got to the point where I could do these decently against the bot, but I ended up having a sort of separate problem in that as a result of doing this, the training that I've done lately, or well, not as lately, before that, in terms of the crouch heavy punch that Rillian was talking about and such, which I had also gotten to okay, reasonably solid, not truly spectacular, but still decent. I was able to get clear 10 points, just not all of the time on medium and such. But that sort of ended up fading away a little bit, because I more or less focused entirely on, okay, I want to learn what my air-to-air options are, what the spacings are, what the angles are, all of that fun stuff. And now I don't have the crouch heavy punch anymore and such things, and so I need to go back to that and get myself to the point, not just where I can do both the crouch heavy punch and the air-to-air, but to the point where I can do both of them at the right spacings and such at the same time, more or less, so that I get the effectively range-based choice down as well. And then I need to be able to do that at 10 points every time on medium, like Rillian was saying, in order to be able to, well, effectively not so often run into these opponents that, despite my best efforts, can basically jump in on me every time. And now that I've been reminded as well, I sort of need to add the back heavy punch option in, because I used to use that somewhat, and, well, and the light DP and all these things, but each one of them fundamentally has its place, and being able to figure out where those are and put them together, and take a bot seriously enough that even if maybe they overlap a little and I was able to do this thing here as opposed to there, or I could have I was able to like light DP in a space, or I could back heavy punch, still putting a bit more effort in to make sure I get the best one, more or less, because a human opponent is going to have, if not all of them, there will always be that one, the perfect spacing to make me screw up my anti-airs. So there's training to do for that. It also sort of goes back to the thing she was mentioning before about, what was it exactly that she said?
Autobiology offense?
Actually,
Because I
no.
think it's the only other thing I talked about.
Alright, no, it was a subcomponent of this.
Oh,
Right,
the only thing I
there's
was
simply the
talking
difference
about.
between footsies and the air. And how, well, if you have that reaction, like I do, and if I'm looking for the air and that's the thing that I'm thinking about and I'm good to go, I'm going to anti-air them every 100% of the time, but I'm also going to get destroyed in footsies. And you can sort of have that confidence, and you can sort of have that training, but you need to get it really down to, like, true muscle memory and have things slotted right and all of that. And so, you've really got to work on it, because otherwise, when you're focused on footsies or neutral, you may know how to anti-air, but it's not going to be automatic.
Final round.
Getting to the point where you can do it basically without thinking about it is a big help in terms of being able to, well, keep thinking about the neutral, or whatever else it is that you want to or need to in a match.
Emotionally, therefore, one of the first things you have to work on is expecting to lose a certain way. Choose the way you're going to lose in this game. And don't give up that choice. Devote yourself to losing only this way. And don't aim too high either. It's not like, okay, I'm going to let my opponent jump in on me forever, but I'm never going to get touched in footsies. Or, right now, I'm going to let myself get beaten on wake-up pressure every time, but before that, I'm going to make sure that I take as long to get knocked down as possible, maybe deal some damage, maybe win some rounds. Because until you can do that aspect of choosing which way you're going to lose, then you'll constantly be bouncing around trying to adapt to whichever way your opponent has managed to last defeat you. And this is another form of psychological manipulation that a strong player will apply to you. This is the adaptation level. They are pushing on you to make sure that you cannot respond to all of the different little things they're able to do. You must make sure that when you have chosen to lose and are starting the execution for this, that you don't take a lot of mental stock in the thing that should be beating you happening. That thing is just going to happen until you're way better. You can think of it a lot like fighting against an opponent in a game that is not that hard to deal with in mode A, but super hard to deal with in mode B, and therefore you just lose against them when they're in mode B all the time. But on the other hand, they randomly switch between the two, and you could just shrug it off if they happen to spend a really long time in mode B, and you lose. The Wolf was therefore just placed in this situation of trying to play footsies, but basically got very little if any anti-airs, very few dash unders, so the result was as you'd expect. And I've recently discussed with Cosmic Wolf that this is basically going to be a nightmare because no matter how much he tells himself I'm going to anti-air, it doesn't actually happen. And it's not because Necalli has particularly bad anti-airs either. I mean, the crouch heavy punch is a little bit hard to land on Ed, but you can just rising like almost 100% of the time at the ranges that most people are able to take on Necalli. You can't walk up to Necalli, he's very strong in that position. But you can walk up to a certain space where he thinks it's about time to hit you and jump, because then you'll be confusing at least. have no idea if it's laggy or not.
Clearly something is going on. Our Ed seems to have fallen asleep. There's a little bit of lag there.
Okay, they seem to be back. Whatever
Looks like
happened
they're-
has been probably resolved. Yeah, they seem to be back to taking this full on now. See, that moment there of aiming for the heavy kick was a different type of mistake than normal. Not only did it get hit by the fireball, but if you think about it, Mikali's heavy kick doesn't necessarily react or respond in time. And we've known that this opponent will generally jump. So it's not just a matter of being ready to anti-air, it's also a matter of not doing the thing that lets your opponent jump. If you've chosen to lose only by footsies. So let's assume one makes the choice one way or the other. Either you're going to lose because you cannot anti-air and get jumped in on 100% of the time, or you're going to lose because you don't play any footsies and therefore get beat up 100% of the time. There. That's one of the first choices you make in Street Fighter. It's one of the first choices you make in just about every 2D game there is, except maybe Mortal Kombat and Injustice, which are generally counted as the same thing.
This is sort of
Sometimes
why...
jumping in on you is easier, but not.
This is sort of why, for me personally at least, I need to really, really, really train the anti-airs. Because that's the thing I have to push super hard on and get really good at, and get really automatic. Because I'm basically always going to end up losing that way, whether I try to or not, more or less. Because I'm always going to want to, or possibly end up drifting back to, playing footsies in the long term. And so I can decide against certain opponents, like this Ed perhaps, that I am just gonna anti-air you every time, and whatever else happens, happens. And this works, and it might let me win. Certainly if I met this Ed in a tournament, perhaps it would be the best plan. To just drop footsies and go completely at the anti-airs. But ultimately, it's not going to really solve the problem overall. Because I'll still always have that other half of the game missing.
Another decent option is to recognize your strength, build your strength up really high first, and then trust your body. If you believe that you can just play footsies pretty much automatically, then it's free and okay for you to focus on the anti-air. You might turn out to be wrong, and for some people that's really depressing. To say, I've trained all of these footsies for so long, and then as soon as I'm forced to focus on anti-airing, my footsies dies. It just means you have more levels of footsies to gain though. You could have gotten better at footsies. It's not automatic to your body to just play footsies. At which point you have to question, how do I get there? How do I get so much better that my body just automatically plays footsies or does spacing, and therefore I can focus on my anti-airs?
Sounds like the sort of thing I want to pursue.
Part of the problem actually is today she faces the issue of her footsies with Karine are automatic, her footsies with Sakura are not.
Yep.
And the result of that is obviously that now there's two different ways to lose. But you still have to pick one. And against this particular opponent, it doesn't really seem as if footsies is a concern in the first place, so it won't come up.
Yeah, I suppose I would sort of just... I have to choose to win in the air and lose to footsies to even get to the point where footsies was a relevant question. And so I'm gonna try and put my effort towards that and see if I can pull it off. Even despite the fact that, knowing me, I'm gonna end up drifting back to footsies if I lose my focus or conviction.
But we're not actually sure if this person's going to be playing more. They seem to be taking a break or something.
Alright. Well, back to Amara then.
This in fact brings us back to the same space, and when you have two players who are basically looking for the same thing, the matches feel more interesting, but this only happens because neither of them is specifically out for blood trying to win. In other words, if this were a tournament, and the opponent was not a friend and well-known and all that stuff, the answer to this, from Amara's side, would be to jump. Without question, to auto-play footsies and zoning and jump. Now, because both players somewhat enjoy trying to play the ground game, we're not likely to see a lot of that I'm just going to jump because I don't think you're going to anti-air. Even though Sakura doesn't always anti-air all that hard, and doesn't get a whole lot of good positions off it in the strict sense, you'll still see that here we're going to end up playing a lot of footsies, and the result will often be something that I guess both players find more interesting in the strict sense, but also doesn't necessarily teach either of them as much. Or rather, it doesn't teach them how to deal with someone who decides to jump a lot. This is further complicated by the fact that knowing you should jump does not mean you are good at jumping yet, because there are specifically aspects of the game where learning the precise timing and spacing for jumps and how to convert into damage takes precedence over just avoiding your opponent's strength by jumping occasionally. But as you can see, they're both very grounded players and are used to doing this whole thing from that perspective primarily. Despite the fact that, quite honestly, most of the time, just deciding to jump in the middle of what's going on here will lead to that. And this can happen to a lot of people at some really high levels. Is it technically bad or good for this to happen? Not really. If you've listened to a lot of high-level commentary, it's simply that you take the level of when to jump and how to such a degree that other people view it differently. Because you're not just jumping constantly, you're jumping at that timing and spacing where you know your opponent is not going to respond. That would have been probably another good one. Had Amara jumped there, it would probably have been a lot of damage.
I would not have
This is because a lot of... No, this is because a lot of us set our plans a little bit before we should. We plan to play footsies 3 moves in and don't have a response when the opponent actually just jumps.
Round 1. Fight.
It is entirely possible to have a footsie style, actually, that's entirely based around getting your opponent to ignore you long enough for you to jump. I would not say this is what I'm generally doing, but it's not that far off. Chun-Li and Colleen have some other special skills that give them additional mobility in it, on top of just being able to jump, that I often use more than jumping. But I definitely have a lot of things that I do in footsies purely to distract you long enough to let me jump at you. Ken is a character who's quite strong at this because he has air tatsus and a lot of different air tatsu setups and stuff like that to make the opponents think, oh, that looks like an easy jump to anti-air. I've anti-aired those before in my life, but it doesn't turn out the way they expect because he does something to change his aerial vector and the jump becomes something different.
Round 2.
It's also actually quite difficult to jump in on people who are very focused on jumps themselves, because they know, this is not a space where I can jump, because I'm not advantaged enough to get that whole jump thing. But this is a space where you're going to want to jump, because you know I'm not advantaged enough for that. And so on. Making people mistime things is also part of this, and can easily shift back and forth within a round simply because one person has overcommitted or believed too little or too much in something they wanted to do. Recognizing the rhythm of when you can and cannot jump, when you can and cannot move forward, all of these little things shift both your skill and your emotions about the match.
Final round.
Recognizing, for example, my opponent is now looking for me to jump. That means they're distracted enough that I might be able to play some footsies. In fact, that's quite a lot of what you're trying to do. Recognizing which state your opponent is closest to, this is much more complicated at higher levels, mind you. But at this level it is my opponent looking for the ground or the air? And that's it. And if you can figure out which one of those two things they're not looking for, just do the other thing. This also helps because both sides get better at doing both at a time. When training with friends, if you neglect a certain part of it, basically not playing any footsies and just jumping and getting all your damage that way, or always playing footsies, never jumping, and trying to get all your damage that way, you never actually push your friends to the limit of their own cognitive ability. It's just a back and forth thing of how much health each of you takes off with a particular combo, more or less.
Alright. Looks like I get to fight him again anyway. So off to Anti-Air Land.
One other issue we often have with our emotions is one we are familiar with through Omni-Rabbit's approach to this. When you realize your opponent is winning because they're jumping at you constantly, and then come to the conclusion, well, if I anti-air you, I will win, you're often sabotaging yourself, both emotionally and within the game. It's generally not true that any reasonably skilled opponent is going to just start losing because you keep anti-airing them. It's more likely that they're going to stop jumping as much, and then you also need to be able to beat them in footsies, and you need to be able to beat them in footsies while focused on the fact that they want to jump.
And that's where I'll hit my limit.
The other way to deal with this is, depending on what your character's anti-airs are, you can get some good knockdowns and deal with the situation so that they don't get to do anything. They don't just get flipped back in the air or into a scramble. You can find a way to make sure, okay, I have advantage now because you jumped. Might not even have done a lot of damage. In fact, most of the time, the only character I know of that does damage and gets something out of that is Chun-Li and Akuma. Everyone else, I think, more or less has to deal with it the other way. Yes, because even the other air throw characters, they don't get anything after their air throw for the most part. The situation has shifted, they're not in any danger anymore, but they don't get to make the opponent stay still and have to respect them after the air throw or after certain things. Karine sorta has it, but her jump medium punch into heavy punch target combo is not quite as strong for putting the opponent down and making sure that she gets some advantage, so it depends on where in the match that happens. Similar to Bison. But there are other things you can do by recognizing what your beneficial position is. Rather than trying to go in to hit your opponent, move to that correct position and repeat your situation somehow. But we can see that that situation was almost entirely the same thing. There's a lot of distance, not quite expecting the situation that happens, but the jump was coming. Because the jump is always coming. And there is a reason for this. It's not as if these people playing in this way are terrible players or don't know what they're doing. It's that they're seeing the flaw in you and taking advantage of it. When you have gotten further in, then is the only time you can tell the player's skill level. When you have anti-aired them in situations where they were setting that up a certain number of times, then you can say with some clarity, oh, this opponent is not quite at my level yet. Because once I start to anti-air them, they lose all of their offense, they lose all of their ability. But we don't know that because we have not seen our Ryu here be pushed to that point as yet. So they have not needed to use their final form yet. We don't know if they have one above this one, but always assume that the player does. Some people will just do the thing until you learn to stop them, because that's how a lot of people play fighting games.
Almost got my back heavy punch.
Round 2. Fight.
Optimal anti-airing is therefore also really a big deal. Understanding that you should air throw this particular thing, back heavy punch this other thing, this is something you build up a while as well, relatively muscle memory related. But the first step to all of that is getting yourself to not hit footsie buttons against an opponent who wants to jump, which is a totally different set and issue of the game.
And that's hard, for me at least. I often don't think of it in terms of not hitting footsie buttons against an opponent that's going to jump, so much as trying to have the anti-airs on deck and be watching for the jump and ready to respond when they do. And this often gets me into the obvious problem where I am absolutely ready to jump to anti-air, I can stop you perfectly, except that I hit this button and I'm not going to recover in time. Which is a whole host of problems that I guess it sort of seemed like maybe they are separate to solve. I guess that is what you just said, after all. And so I do need to grind my anti-airs and get them into the right spaces and slots, but I also have to figure out how to do that. And that one I don't really know how to fix as easily. At least I don't know of how to throw a bot at it, for instance.
And here we have Claw taking it to the next level. This character is one that Amara knows relatively well how to anti-air on Ryu, and has very little idea how to anti-air on Ken. And Ken doesn't have a lot of really great ways of dealing with him. You can play a certain specific ranged game with some relative success,
Round 1.
but unlike Ryu, at least where you have some other options, you basically have to anti-air this character when he jumps every time. It's exhaustingly difficult to do. Even when you have an uppercut, it's exhaustingly difficult to do. Fortunately, his cross-ups aren't as great, so you don't have to worry so much, and Shinryuken will probably put a bit more effect in than before. But this is tiring. To the point where if you train on our Clawbot for a while, he doesn't even jump and it's still tiring.
Round 2. Fight.
This is particularly true because he's not really an easy character to throw fireballs against, and he's not an easy character to advance against. In fact, you spend a lot of time baiting the jump so that you can uppercut specifically. Because it's not even a matter of Claw not being able to play footsies and therefore jumping, but rather his footsies are so much better than yours that he knows he gets to jump. One thing you can do against characters like this is that if your own character has a really good neutral jump heavy kick, you can often deal with them. But even then, they can just adapt to hitting a specific other thing to take you down, and it would not change much of their plan at all. To them, it's just, okay, I need to change what I intend to do when I jump from this thing to maybe this thing. And most of the time they don't get hurt for hitting the other button either. So there's really no benefit to you, period. This particularly comes up in the fact that execution is a big deal here. Uppercut motions are hard to do from crouch block. And crouch heavy punch can often be tricked out or baited in some way so that you don't actually have success with it. Your best bet mostly is in fact to go for the crouch heavy punch as your way of, once again, choosing to lose. If you can't get yourself to uppercut, don't uppercut. Make your opponent have to beat you by making their jump so perfect that your crouch heavy punch fails. And they will do that, but at least that's a way you've chosen to lose the match.
Round 2. Fight.
This is also where we have the whole you can't afford to play footsies because you won't have time, because crouch heavy punch is quite slow move in most cases, and therefore every issue you have with this gets compounded. You have hit a different button while trying to play footsies, your opponent ignored you the entire time and jumped, and then you got too slow on your crouching heavy punch and lost. But here we've reached the point where the opponent will stop jumping mostly, and now Amara can lose in footsies as Goken intended.
I guess the thing this makes me think about is, alright, so how do I decide how I intend to lose? Because in some cases it's sort of obvious, and in other cases I'm sometimes, I guess, swept away already and I don't really know. I guess it's just fundamentally a matter of deciding somewhere to plant my feet.
That is something that normally you should go into a fighting game with the expectation that you're going to have to decide how to lose. Every match you pick, you can even have notes on how you normally lose it and therefore how you should be expecting to lose it. This is another thing you can just do in the sense of making notes or deciding something about yourself as a player. If you've decided, you know what, I'm going to let you jump at me forever. I'm going to let you jump at me forever and I'm going to beat you in footsies, and if you happen to get hit enough by my crouch heavy punch, then I will win the round, and if you happen to beat me with the jump in enough times, then I will lose the round. But going into it without the expectation one way or another means that you don't have an anchor for your emotions, and it just builds up either as frustration, underconfidence, or just straight anger, which is fine if the anger part, which is fine if it is because your opponent is that good, i.e. you know you're supposed to anti-air them with the crouch heavy punch, but always fail it because they're so good at the crouch heavy punch, but so good at avoiding it. But on the other hand, then you get to learn what that looks like.
Let's do this.
All in all, it can be kind of hard to emotionally do sometimes, in terms of picking and sticking to a way to lose. Just because, well, I had the thought a moment ago. But obviously we sort of go into these games wanting to win, fundamentally. And at least for me, it's sometimes, even if I sort of pick a way to lose, or like expect to lose in a particular way, if I haven't necessarily like solidly decided it, or I'm just losing in some completely different way or whatever, because my opponent is behaving differently and I'm still not ready for it, ending up then feeling like, well, should I like change my plan here or whatever, and then I end up getting mixed up by adaptation or shifts from my opponent's side. Could be a little confusing.
That's a matter of knowledge. Like you have to also recognize, take the reality check. figure out how much do I really know about this character? How much do I really know about this game? Should I really be thinking I even can win against this person? Because a lot of the time, you really just can't.
I see. I suppose if you're losing the way you decided to win, or, well, you know what I mean. I guess that really would be the obvious solution, at least to some degree. I suppose it's also one that psychologically, emotionally, maybe is a little hard.
I think most people find it hard.
Before you get to the point of settling down and accepting it, and basically shifting yourself to that mindset.
It also happens because sometimes we get the feeling that we shouldn't be losing to a particular thing, or that we are better than a particular person, but they're only winning because they do a particular thing. All of these things are a specific form of egotism that tends to be really toxic to yourself when you face this sort of game, or any sort of game with a true challenge in it. Feeling I shouldn't be losing this way is a bit more complicated than just being able to get mad and fix it. Most of the time you cannot do that. Because the wolf is still here hitting buttons in footsies. And I'm not sure if he chose to do that specifically, but most of the time, if these jumps are landing, it's because of choosing to hit buttons in footsies. It's not necessarily even that he's not ready to anti-air, but because a footsie button happened, and therefore the anti-air did not.
The thing I was describing a moment ago.
Some characters, like Alex in fact, are good at doing this by a different method. They use a footsie button that has a decent amount of risk to it if the opponent stands there and blocks, but also moves them forward in some way to help them avoid the jump or mess with their spacing. Alex can, for example, use his crouch heavy punch for this. He can use, actually to some extent, his sweep for this, or he can flash shop in particular situations as a different way of dealing with this. In the end, the goal being to make sure that, yeah, I need to play footsies and I can't get myself to not do it, but can I get myself to do it in a way that will show off my opponent enough that I get something out of it?
Alex wins.
But not all characters are like this, and if you play a character that cannot do it, then you have to accept the stress that goes with it. Characters that can't do it also tend to have better anti-airs. It's usually a mobility versus surety question. Most characters are either able to anti-air really well, but not that good at getting out of the way, or decently good at getting out of the way, but their anti-airs are difficult in some way.
Well, I can class Karine easily. Is Sakura just sort of on the other side then, considering?
Sakura's dash is good, Sakura's Tatsu at a certain timing is good. I'd say Sakura is better at anti-airing than she is at getting out of the way. There's always a spectrum.
Yeah. Okay. Who's the best anti-air in the game?
Sagat, for the most part. I mean, you'd think that Sagat, being relatively slow, would have trouble anti-airing, but for the most part, if you are playing Sagat properly, your opponent can't get to the jump in space where they actually get to cross him up and still not get hurt by something before then. Ryu and Ken are good, but they can be twisted up or beaten in particular ways. And Akuma's is good at a specific similar range. If you can keep the opponent far enough in front of you, it's fine. But Birdie's probably the flat out best one though, I think.
I see. He has that air chain grab and all that too.
Air chain grab, crouching medium punch, bullhorn, EX bullhorn which is armored, heavy punch which is armored. Dolphin dive which actually avoids certain things. stand heavy punch. He's probably the hardest character to jump on in the game as a whole. And as you can probably tell, he also has among the least mobility possible for getting out of the situation. This matchup actually goes relatively similarly because Cosmolf is going to try really hard to not use this guidance unnecessarily, as it just leads into Alex being able to do big damage. And this works decently well as Necalli deals with Alex fairly well as a whole, as he doesn't necessarily have to get closer to do anything to him. He can fake him out in a lot of ways, and invincible moves that cover a lot of space deal with a lot of Alex's approaches. But Alex has a big problem against Necalli, which loses in turn to Necalli's disguidance. Alex can just walk forward against his character. A lot of the time, the things you would feel are threatening are not at all, and in turn, Alex walking forward against Necalli means that Necalli will often be tempted to either use his Seismo, which is really great actually for the purpose, but can be messed with in certain ways, or he'll be tempted to do this guidance. Because you can't really dash up throw Alex under most situations, especially once he already has meter. You'll get flash shot, or if you pull yourself too close, you'll get actually caught in power bomb and similar, for a lot of problems on your end. Necalli mostly therefore wants to keep Alex at a space where Alex doesn't want to walk, and wants to charge up and do slash elbow or do flash shot and then die, because that's basically usually what's going to happen. Once Necalli is in the trigger, his movement speed is so much better that there are things he can punish by walk-up throw that nearly no other character can actually do. And if you're like, oh well, I can tech those, he also has a command grab. And it's not a highly telegraphed command grab either, so walk-up with punish command grab is a thing Necalli can just do. Not on a lot of characters, but Alex is definitely one of those characters where it actually becomes a thing. So you see what happens here is that as long as the wolf doesn't want to walk, his victory more or less comes down to Cosmos execution. Because that run-up sweep was almost certainly, again, there you go.
Dang you.
And this is difficult, yes, but because it's a walk-up command grab, you're already holding forward. And there's the last part of it. It is one of the few moves in the game that if you get the execution wrong, and your opponent wasn't so sure or tried to walk out of it, and you hit the kick, they're going to get clipped anyway. It's a big risk for Necalli because he can always just get blocked. But as an overall method of playing it, against a character that doesn't usually have the freedom to throw out big, or rather quick buttons in front of you that will combo into big problems, this is relatively valid. As a just, I'm going to deal with you by doing it. But watch what happens when he gets to just walk him down. Necalli has to spend a lot of time judging distances, and most of us will automatically give up some space whenever that happens. Meaning that Alex gets to take all of that space, and you can't jump at him. He's already expecting that. You don't know if he'll block, because he can block a lot of your lunging moves on reaction and so on. Meaning that unless you have like some really good plus style hop move, or the ability to walk forward into particular things really well, you will just get walked to the corner most of the time. Necalli can again deal with this by using Seismo, by using stand medium punch in certain spaces, and being at least willing to miss guidance occasionally so that you can't just walk into him all the way. But as an overall flow to the game, it's not really that hard for Alex to do without his charge moves in this matchup. He doesn't really need them for much of anything. He also has high enough health that taking a couple Seismos or a couple Disguidances is really not a concern for him so much. Meaning that, honestly, Cosmolf is still better off doing this just because of, oh, I might get to V-Trigger before you get anything. It takes a while, but the patience is a thing that really matters here. And the more your opponent has to focus on, the more difficult it is for them to do things like Power Bomb on reaction to blocking this guidance. If the spacing is right, it's difficult for them to tell exactly when things should happen. But there's the main problem with the Seismo, as you've just seen, is that most of the time, Nikali will manage to block Alex's jump, but I don't think they gave Nikali any invincibility on any of his uppercuts, meaning that Alex does get to jump in, he does get to get close. Nikali might not get hurt in that moment, but he gets hurt soon after most of the time. But from the Nikali side, the question is, how good are you at fighting the advancing form in front of you? How long can you keep Alex from getting you to the corner? Do you have any chance of, for example, distracting him enough that as soon as he does get you there, you still get out and make the whole thing repeat? Nikali is actually a relatively good character at playing lame, as we would put it, because unless the opponent has armor on specific things, he can intercept them with a lot of stuff. It's mostly people with very fast buttons, or let's call it randomness, that hits right in front of him immediately, that Nikali has to worry about.
Alex wins.
Taking this to the next logical extreme then, Alex is trying to walk, but he's not necessarily hitting buttons. This means it's difficult for Nikali to get a jump. This guidance is a bigger chance than a jump, but he's probably not going to get a jump very easily. If he gives Alex too much space, Alex will manage to get in by dashing rather than just walking, which is even more dangerous. So, interestingly, Nikali actually wants to let Alex get physically closer to him before he makes any moves of his own. This is because, once again, you're thinking about the amount of damage Alex can do in particular things. This game is relatively finely tuned. Alex has no combos, really good ones anyway, off his crouch medium kick. He has to charge up his hard hit first, and if you were playing, you probably got either the jump or the disguidance in that moment. So, Alex's crouching medium kick is his main way of getting Nikali to get into trouble in those spaces. But this move doesn't really lead to anything, so Nikali can just afford to let Alex walk closer to him before he makes any real responses. He'll take damage, in fact he may get clipped many times in a round. But it's just going to be that. It's going to be clipped. Whereas Nikali is one of the highest output characters in the game. I am going to activate my V-Trigger, have my meter ready, or even sometimes not, and more or less delete you from here. As you can see, he also manages to grasp a large amount of screen space by things like the EX command grab, meaning that he's not really that scared of things. He can get pushed quite a ways to the corner without worrying about that being the thing that's going to bring him down. He just has to find that moment and take it, and he's probably back at least mid-screen, if not better.
Alex wins.
These games are always about risks. The opponent, as you get higher and higher in the ranks, will learn to check your dashes and so on. But you can definitely strain them psychologically in a lot of ways.
It's go time.
Seems that the Ryu from earlier did head out after all.
Let's do this.
Well, he gave us an hour.
That was nice of them. Here you have a similar problem. Sakura doesn't really beat Alex in footsies. She can take less damage than Alex in footsies, but she doesn't tend to win, strictly speaking. And there's a specific point where he becomes hard to anti-air. In fact, Sakura's best bet about Alex is to walk into his buttons. That's the first thing you need to understand about this matchup. Walk to the range where crouch, medium kick, and sweep become good ideas, and lose by getting hit by those buttons. And Alex, in turn, should choose to lose by I misspaced my jump and actually got anti-aired. Because most of the time, if Alex's jump spacing is perfect, he won't get anti-aired. So that is why I suggest to you both. He should jump a lot, and you should walk forward precisely to the point where medium kick is going to hit you. And if you lose under those conditions, you've probably done the right thing for the day.
Alright.
The reason for this interaction is simple. Alex is hard to anti-air when he's further out than that because of the range of his jump heavy kick, but he's easy to anti-air if he jumps at that spot. All you have to do is be fairly ready for it.
I presume I want to be a little further out than the EX command grab. Or is that simply a risk at the
Probably
space?
yes. That's also a risk, honestly.
Alright.
Similarly, Sakura just generally has to risk getting hit by those, at least at first, before you're used to controlling his movement. Because if you try to make sure you also don't get hit by the sweep or crouch medium kick, then you're not going to be paying enough attention, and even the jumps you could anti-air, you'll fail at. Like that. Because those are like bat jump air throwable and other stuff like that. This isn't to say that she has every single method ready for these anti-airs, but it's still the correct way to aim to lose. Because if Alex also hesitates to hit those buttons for any reason, there's no real reason to hesitate to hit the crouch medium kick, but if he does hesitate, it's also one of the best spaces for Sakura to get to hit some of hers, and not really be in a lot of danger for doing it. Her crouch medium kick is incredible at that range, and her stand medium kick will usually pick Alex out of the air if he chose to jump instead, while only usually barely whiffing over his head, and sometimes even just pokes him and hits him.
So my problem now is I'm actually getting too close, I think.
In terms of game rhythm, this also shifts things, because Alex is less likely to feel comfortable charging for a long time if the Sakura is walking toward him. He's more likely to try to do a move, one that can be blocked or even intercepted, and then the additional point of this is also the range where once Sakura activates her V trigger, she can be plus whenever she wants. However, there is a good counter from Alex's side, specifically that after it's been used, if they're not expecting it, then that's the moment for head crush. Especially if they whiff. So you can build up that sort of thing, but again, basing it on, I chose to lose this way. It is even possible to lose perfectly in the chosen way, and it won't mean anything at all, other than that you aren't good at dealing with multiple things at once.
Round one. Fight.
And that is one of the strongest aspects of Sakura's stand heavy punch. This also goes for Ryu. There are times when your opponent is definitely not going to take many hits, but they want to block. They're not going to challenge you, but they're definitely probably going to block. So you want to move with a nice amount of pushback to make sure they end up back at the space you wanted. Stand heavy punch is usually that move.
Round two. Fight.
So I think now my problem is I'm actually trying to do too much extra stuff.
That I cannot judge because only you can know how much your focus is strained by things that are happening now.
Well, alright then. Next time around, I suppose. I want to write down something about this, but I'm not necessarily sure what. The main parts that I remember are that I want to walk into the range where I'm just barely vulnerable to sweep and crouch medium kick.
As always, I'll suggest remembering these things more so from the perspective of things that are happening, situations, reasons for the situation, than I want to do this. Remember why you want to do the thing, not the thing or writing down the thing. You can usually put it in two parts, so that at least you have both sides. So in this case, Alex is relatively hard to anti-air for Sakura if he jumps at max range, because he doesn't have to hit his heavy kick, but you have to react really quickly to anti-air him if he does, and basically that's just your uppercut. And depending on how he times it, he can often win that jump in, or he can whiff entirely and then get something right afterwards because of the anti-air she uses. So, the reason you want to be closer to Alex is so he can't jump. And it just comes with a downside that you can get hit by his crouch medium kick. Ken faces a similar situation.
Round one.
He's very relatively poor at stopping that particular jump from Alex. But he's not all that worried about taking that hit from the crouch medium kick, or that hit from the sweep. So you can simply choose, you know what, okay, I'll take that. Ken is the opposite side of the problem. Ken whiffs a lot of his uppercuts on Alex because of not being sure which uppercut to do. You'd think, well, use the medium one, it's invincible. But Alex doesn't really have to jump in the same way, and his jump feels a little weird. It's a little hard to time it when you're not used to the character yet. Ken, however, is one of the few characters that can benefit from the dash under, and can also just use his actual run or his forward medium kick I think it is, to pass under Alex when he jumps without too much strain or stress. It's being able to recognize what has just happened so you can respond right afterward that is hard. So, once again, you're mostly aiming to get close enough that it's ambiguous to Alex whether or not he should jump. And once you're in that spot, be ready to do something, usually to move forward in some way. And you're just going to have to occasionally take those crouch medium kicks and whatever else. Ken is a high mobility character, as you've seen there. He moves slightly out of the way when he's doing things that might be footsies against Alex. So Alex can't necessarily slowly move back and then try to set up a button or go for something really big and slow, or to like try to power up with his V skill, because Ken might hit him. But if Alex jumps at the same spacings and Ken went for that same attack, he tends to pass under the jump. And Alex is not really a strong cross-up character. He will get things from the cross-up, but he has to be planning the cross-up from before then. And if he's planning the cross-up, then he's often out of position and it still fails. Ken's also one of the stronger characters at ignoring Alex's charge or dealing with him by being in the air, but not really telegraphing what he's going to do just because he did. However, his V-trigger doesn't help him the way Sakura's does. He's usually better off using his V-reversal in a situation where he didn't uppercut, and because he didn't uppercut, the opponent thinks it's their turn. Because characters like Ken, who could just uppercut you out of stuff, most of the time when you actually don't uppercut, the opponent feels validated and thinks, okay, I'm gonna go in for stuff now because you didn't uppercut me before I even got started. And then they get V-reversal and didn't think about it. Similarly, being able to do things like jump EX Tatsu to get out of the corner can solve some of your problems as well. But knowing the general timing, this is most likely Cosmic Wolf's last or penultimate match. I'm pretty sure this is the last. This is a Mish-Mash lounge, which means it may stay open longer. But we're likely to only go through one more round of matches, or perhaps just one or two. And therefore I won't guarantee that this will be continuing. But back to Alex plus Nakali. We've seen the outcome before to some extent, so more or less expecting more of the same. If you're watching based on the previous, watch carefully for what happens when Alex fails to walk down and starts to do too many other things. And similarly, what happens when Nakali doesn't get his chances to push Alex back using his command grab or EX command grab. Once the Kali reaches the corner, Alex has a relatively large advantage. but it's not that large. It's usually patience that makes the decision at that point. Since Alex's dash is not so great, and he often likes to do things like dash up command grab, Necalli can often jump over his head even if it's not really the greatest idea at the time. And because Necalli can basically, not necessarily super quickly, but he can dive kick if you give him enough space, Alex can't corner guard him as easily. He always has to at least consider, is he trying to go over my head or is he going to try and come down on it? Alex has a lot of health. I don't know if it's going to kill him. Nope. Buffs.
Alex wins.
But the flow is still more or less as expected. Opportunities open up through this style of play because you are so much more aware of your resources and what they were quote-unquote meant to be used for, that it's easier to recognize, oh, I should do super now because I haven't had to use my meter for anything else so far, and I'm close to the corner, I'm gonna die if I don't, let's do it. Necalli is, in this case for example, pushing on Alex a little bit more. Part of the reason why at high levels this match isn't that hard for Necalli is because Necalli can move into the space where Alex wants to hit footsie buttons and stomp. Alex should still walk him down because if Necalli stomps before Alex hits any button, then it's usually easy to beat him up from there. But you can't necessarily control Necalli well enough as Alex. You have to let him start to get to the point where he wants to stomp and then beat that. The result is that most of the time, Necalli gets to keep on walking forward without ever actually stomping. He can do overhead, he can do crouch heavy punch, he can do stand medium punch. Because Necalli is now the one in position to make Alex not want to whiff buttons randomly. So you get some fairly strong footsie matches between these two characters until Necalli gets cornered. And then a lot of work has to happen very fast to resolve that situation as quickly as possible and go back to playing the neutral he was liking. But there you see it once again, all of that space behind Necalli now. If this were a high level match, you'd be hearing people talk about how this is such a bad thing for Alex, because he doesn't have a way to really force this situation to change. His meter is good, but nope, there we go again.
Final round. Fight.
So now Alex still has an advantage having meter, but you can see where the stomp happens to get in. Sometimes Alex wants to approach from really far away. Necalli reads this, sees the dash or whatever, stomps, prevents the whole thing, gets basically advantage, and pushes Alex back a little more. This is exhausting on both sides, but it's naturally exhausting. You can see the effects of the strain because the wolf is starting to use slash elbow more, starting to dash a ton more. These aren't really good tactics, and in a longer set would most likely lead to being dismantled until he recognized, oh wait, I'm doing the wrong thing again, so Cosmic Wolf is starting to beat me. Because all he has to do at that point is go back to a relatively relaxed form of play. Alex doesn't do that well against Necalli when he starts dashing and doing other things of that type, so it tends to get pushed in Necalli's favor, especially once V-Trigger is active. But that's the end of that for the night. before we'll go into our, let's go with final demo. We've reached that point. The choice is which day to use for further bot development. This week is most likely exploring the weirdness of Merkava. He does require quite a bit more research than most Unist characters in terms of how to come up with a bot that's intended to simulate what you need to understand. Mainly because watching high-level Merkava and watching mid-level or lower-level Merkava seems to be worlds apart, and therefore deciphering which is kind of difficult. At what point is a player winning because this is a shenanigan that they learned early on, and when it is a specific tactic this character is supposed to use? Either way, the expectation is that unfortunately we will have no Tuesday train. And will instead spend that time doing it, particularly because tomorrow will be Street Fighter maintenance, and even though that would end by the standard time, either way, we'd still prefer to have the mindset in that direction. Meaning, no stream tomorrow. We are likely to be back with Sandbag Casuals on Wednesday though. Especially if we have set up a certain situation that we want. And of course, Kame House on Thursday. But back to our match. You're definitely getting to see a lot of this play out. Alex needs to anti-air and could probably anti-air Sakura at that spacing, but you can't really be sure Sakura's going to jump because she doesn't have a strong reason to. Especially once her V-trigger becomes available. Once she has V-trigger, she doesn't have to jump. She doesn't have to do much of anything, really. She doesn't really need projectiles in this matchup, so she can just activate it and hit with Hokusho over and over and over with little or no threat to her.
Until that last minute where I fall back into poor habits and autopilot and hit a Toshi. I'm so disappointed that Hokusho now has a V-trigger drain on it. But I think they buffed it in other ways,
like a big deal.
I suppose that's just a thing.
But
On the other
there's
hand, I
that
think I get,
autopilot Hokusho. Sorry,
5
Otoshi.
uses.
Just the particular Otoshi timing.
I can do that when he walks away from me. This is glorious. Oh, I got a little too aggressive.
Rather, you got aggressive and your body still doesn't automatically anti-air for you. Because
Yes.
based on what I saw in that moment, you actually did have time to hit the anti-air or get out of the way. But your body is not yet set up for that. And this is why it's super important to understand all of the aspects of your anti-airs and why you need them. It's okay to hit crouch medium kick and to have your opponent jump over that crouch medium kick. But you also must uppercut after it because there's nothing else that will be fast enough.
Well, I was attempting an uppercut, but I'll take the alternative option.
Yeah, that killed way better than the uppercut would have.
Yes, yes it did. Of course, now I don't have it.
But do you need it?
Honestly, probably
Because
not.
if you're playing this matchup in this way, very seldom does the use of your meter really decide whether or not you're getting out of a situation. It becomes more meaningful when Alex has gotten close-ish to the corner. You have to really decide if you're going to commit to the ESDP, but for the most part, if you're playing decently, I don't really think that even happens.
This neutral jump is causing me trouble now. But I think it probably is solved by the same button. Ooh. That was almost bad.
This one's always a hard decision to make because, yes, Alex has... He can't be reversal out of it or anything, but he could always, in a lot of situations, actually parry the super off the cancel. So
Yeah,
you can't always just do as you like.
I wasn't even thinking about that. I was just trying to get in a spacing and timing where I could land the super and
Well, then
manage
you
the
might
chip
have
in the
died.
first place. And I've forgotten about that aspect, actually. But anyway, last match of the night.
Lobby is again most likely going to stay open. This is our last match on stream.
Oops.
Lounge owner may change, but it's very likely, obviously, that it will be one of the 3 remaining.
Oh. That would have worked if it was an air throw, too. And I would have been happier if it was an air throw. Oops. Ah, dang. Well, okay. I suppose that's how that goes.
As you can see, Alex does benefit somewhat from just going with the crouch medium punch to control the space all the time, as this does give him enough charge to do other moves. But most of the time, this telegraphs his intention and the moves become very reactable. You just have to recognize that, oh, if he's hitting crouch medium punch there, he can't jump because he's going to end up in a bad position. And you can sometimes anti-air him even with the same button when he does stomp or something similar. So you're just not really in danger. He's generally not a quick enough character that him hitting crouch medium punch and you blocking it is going to lead to a big problem. He's not good at getting close enough to you before he can be checked by one of your buttons or similar, so he has to distract you fairly hard in order to get anything off this. Flash Chop is his better option there, but even then, it's just him trying to chip away at your health so that he doesn't have to deal with you for too long. Depending on your own character's range and ability to punish certain things, he therefore doesn't benefit at all.
Unfortunately, my crouch heavy punch is not fast enough some of these times, even though I know the thing is coming. So I'm going to have to train that reaction a little bit to cut a few frames off my own personal side of that equation. But that is where the grind is. And so with that, we are closing up our stream for the night. The lounge might go on a little longer, but otherwise, if you want to hear more about that possible sandbag casuals on Wednesday, or anything else later this week, you can listen to our Twitter, 2_MK_FGC. And if you want to check out any of the bots we've been discussing, or anything else, you can look at that on our website, 2-mk.org. And so with that, have a good night, everyone.